Welcome back, everybody, for another deep dive. Today, we're going to be exploring a true crime case that at first seemed like, well, an open and shut suicide, but then it took a very dark and unexpected turn. We're talking about Lynn Hearnen, a 62-year-old woman from Wisconsin who everybody said was just the kindest, most generous person.
Yeah, Lynn was like the kind of person who still sent handwritten birthday cards.
Mm.
Even though everybody's texting it on social media these days. She was a former hairdresser, and even though she didn't really like technology, her friends said she was like the glue that held their whole group together.
So can you imagine the shock when Lynn was found dead at home, surrounded by all these pill bottles? It seemed like, just a straightforward overdose.
Yeah, the first thought was, oh, this is a suicide, especially with all the pills there. But the toxicology report showed something really shocking. Lynn had died from a lethal dose of tetrahydrozoline.
Tetrahydrozoline. I don't think I've heard of that before.
Well, it's the main ingredient in like over-the-counter eye drops. Definitely not something you'd expect to find in a murder investigation.
Wow, that's pretty crazy. So eye drops as a murder weapon. That's a new one for me. So who is in Lynn's life that might have, wanted to hurt her?
Well, the investigation pretty quickly focused on Jessie Kasheski. She was Lynn's caretaker and the one who actually found her body. And right away, there were some red flags. Jessie had some prior convictions for identity theft and forgery, so obviously that made her look suspicious right off the bat.
Yeah, I can see how that would raise some eyebrows. So I imagine the investigators started looking into Lynn's finances to see if there was, any connection to Jesse's past crimes. What did they find?
Oh, they found a whole lot. It was really unsettling. Turns out Lynn's bank account was basically empty. There were tons of transfers to Jessie, and I'm not talking about small amounts here. This was a huge chunk of Lynn's savings.
So while Jessie was supposedly taking care of Lynn, she was also stealing her money.
Yeah, it really looks that way. And the investigators, they didn't stop there. They looked at Jessie's spending, and it didn't match up at all with this whole image of a grieving caretaker.
What do you mean?
Jessie was, well, she was living the high life. Shopping sprees, big bar tabs for all her friends, casino trips, the whole 9 yards. That kind of lifestyle just doesn't fit with someone who's struggling financially or just, benefiting from someone's generosity.
It sounds like she was almost like flaunting it, completely ignoring the trail she was leaving.
You got it. And it really makes you question what her motives were and how involved she was in Lynn's death. And the deeper the investigators dug, the more holes they found in Jessie's story.
Like what?
Well, they interviewed her 6 times, and each time she had a different explanation for how Lynn died. And every story was crazier than the last. First, it was Lynn drinking Visine with vodka to get a buzz. Then it was Lynn intentionally downing 6 bottles of Visine.
Wow, that is quite a range of stories. It sounds like she was just saying whatever she thought would, work. Did the investigators buy any of it?
No, not at all. With every interview, her stories got more and more elaborate, more contradictory. The investigators saw right through it. They knew she was trying to control the narrative, but she wasn't doing a very good job. Remember that farewell audio tape she kept talking about?
Oh, yeah, the one that was supposedly in a lockbox, then it was in a storage unit, and then she said it was buried in a park, right?
Exactly. Every time they asked her for more details, the location of this super important piece of evidence would change. And guess what? None of those places even existed.
So she wasn't just making up these wild stories, she was also sending the investigators on these wild goose chases. That's pretty mold.
Yeah, it definitely suggests a level of manipulation and deceit that goes way beyond just trying to, cover up a crime.
Okay, so we've got a suspicious caretaker with a history of financial crimes, a victim who died from this really rare poison, and a suspect whose story keeps changing. But was there anything at the crime scene itself that backed up this theory of a homicide?
You bet.
Yeah.
Let's talk about those crime scene photos and what they told us about how Lynn really died.
Okay, so the toxicology report, it says eye drops, which is like something out of a movie, right? But it was the crime scene itself that really started to show what Jessie was up to. What did the investigators find that just didn't add up?
You know those crime scene photos they took right away? They turned out to be super important. Remember, it was all staged to look like a suicide, with pill bottles all over the place near Lynn's body. But if you really look at the details, they tell a different story.
Okay, so what kind of details are we talking about?
Well, first of all, a lot of those pill bottles, they still had pills in them. Like if someone's really trying to end their life, you'd think the bottles would be empty, right? Or almost empty. This was like someone left pills in there on purpose, trying to make it look like she took a huge overdose.
So they wanted it to look like enough pills to be suicide, but not too many to seem real. Is that what you're saying?
Exactly. Like they were trying to, I don't know, find the right balance, I guess, to make it believable, but not raise too many red flags. Oh, and there's more. Remember those little pieces of pills they found near Lynn's mouth?
Yeah, I remember that from the first part. The medical examiner said something about them being weird, right?
Yeah, they were dry. Like they hadn't been swallowed, just put there, like after she was already dead. It was a small thing, but it really messes up the whole suicide idea.
It's almost like someone just sprinkled them around her mouth, like, to finish off the whole picture of a pill overdose.
Exactly. And this was all before they even knew about the eye drops from the toxicology report. So these little things that didn't make sense, plus Jesse's changing stories, the investigators were already starting to think something fishy was going on.
And then, bam, the toxicology report comes back and says tetrahydrozoline poisoning. That must have been when they really knew something was wrong.
Oh, yeah. And it wasn't just that the stuff was there, it was how much. It was way more than you'd ever get from using eye drops normally. It had to be like deliberate, someone meant to do it.
So at this point, they have a fake crime scene, a caretaker with a history of stealing, and now this poisoning. But how do they actually connect Jesse to giving Lynn the eye drops? It's not like they found a bottle with her fingerprints on it or something.
Well, that's where things get really interesting. Remember all that money Jesse was spending while Lynn's account was being drained? Those purchases weren't just random. They were clues to a bigger plan.
Okay. I'm curious now. How does Jesse's shopping connect to a murder investigation?
The investigators weren't just looking at what she was buying, they were looking at when and where she was spending the money. And what they found was that she was spending a lot, like right after big chunks of money went from Lynn's account to hers. It was almost like she was, I don't know, celebrating each time she got away with it.
And what about all those times she was at the casino? Weren't there a bunch of charges from there on her credit card?
Oh, yeah, and those were especially bad for her. Because remember, she'd said before that she went to jail for identity theft and all that because of a gambling problem. But now she was saying she had it all under control.
So she basically contradicted herself with her own spending habits. It showed she not only wanted Lynn's money, but also that she was lying about this whole gambling thing.
Exactly. It made her look like someone who could not only trick people with money, but also lie really well to make people believe her. And as they kept investigating, they found something else that really didn't look good. A credit card in Lynn's name, but opened after she died.
Hold on. So she was stealing from Lynn while she was alive, and then she tried to keep doing it after she was gone.
That's what it looks like. And the worst part, this new credit card was sent straight to Jesse's address.
Wow, she wasn't even trying to hide it at this point. It's like she thought she could get away with anything.
Crazy, right? Especially considering what she'd done.
Okay, so they have the money stuff, the fake crime scene, and this credit card fraud. But how do they finally prove it was Jesse who gave Lynn the eye drops?
You're not going to believe this, but the missing piece came from Jesse's boyfriend. And what he told them showed a whole other side of Jesse that she'd been hiding.
So we've seen all this evidence of lying, the money being stolen, and then this crazy murder weapon. But the most surprising part is Jesse's own boyfriend. What did he tell the investigators that really broke the case open?
This boyfriend, he had never even met Lynn, but he ended up being a really important witness for the prosecution. Remember all those crazy stories Jesse made up about how Lynn died? Well, she told her boyfriend a bunch of lies, too, which just shows how good she was at making things up and tricking people.
So what kind of lies was she telling him? Was it stuff about Lynn or just random things?
Oh, no, these weren't just random lies. These were specifically to make it seem like she had nothing to do with the murder. Like she told him that Lynn had been in a coma for months and that she actually died in a hospital.
Which, of course, was totally made up.
Exactly. And what's interesting is she wasn't just trying to hide the murder. She was also making herself look like this amazing caretaker, telling him about all the time she spent at the hospital, how hard it was emotionally, all that stuff.
It's like she was making up a whole new personality for herself, like someone who was really selfless and caring, the opposite of what she really was.
You got it. And she didn't just say these things. She actually took furniture from Lynn's house and brought it to her boyfriend's place. Said it was a gift from Lynn before she went into this fake coma.
So she was stealing her money, taking her stuff, and then making up these elaborate stories to make it all seem okay. It's hard to believe, really.
It just shows you that you never really know what people are capable of, even those close to you. But here's where it gets really interesting. During one of their conversations, Jessie said something, just a small thing really, that ended up being her downfall.
What did she say?
She told her boyfriend this story about how she got drugged with Visine at a bar once. It was just a random story, but it showed something really important. She knew about tetrahydrozoline and what it could do to you.
So when one of her own lies, told in a completely different situation, ended up proving that she knew about the murder weapon. That's wild.
It was a huge break for the investigators. It was like the final piece of the puzzle they needed to connect Jesse to the poisoning.
It's amazing how these little things, just random conversations, can sometimes be the most important clues.
That's why it's so important to be thorough in an investigation. It's not just about finding the big, obvious stuff. It's about putting together all these little pieces of information, even if they seem unrelated, until you get the whole picture.
So, with what the boyfriend said and all the other evidence, they finally had enough to arrest Jesse.
Yep, and it happened just in time, too. She was actually about to be released from prison for violating her parole on those earlier charges when they filed the murder charges.
Wow, that must have been a shock. She probably thought she'd gotten away with it.
It wouldn't surprise me. But the investigators, they were smart. They were patient, and they built their case carefully, waiting for the right moment to make their move.
So the trial starts. What did the prosecutors do to explain this whole complicated case to the jury?
Oh, they did an amazing job. It was like they were telling a story. They didn't just throw a bunch of facts at the jury. They presented it in a way that showed Jesse's plan and all the lies she told.
So they basically laid out a timeline, connecting all the dots between the money, the fake crime scene, and the poisoning.
Exactly. And they made it really easy to understand. Plus, they used Jesse's own words against her, showing how she kept contradicting herself and changing her story.
Those changing stories must have been a gift to the prosecution.
They were. It made her look really unreliable, like no one could trust anything she said. And then there was all the stuff about her spending, going to the casino, buying drinks for everyone. They brought all that up too, right?
Oh, for sure. They showed all the financial records compared to how Jesse was living. It was a really clear way to show what she was doing with Lynn's money. That must have been pretty impactful in the courtroom. What did the defense say about all of that?
They tried to say that Lynn was actually really generous and had given Jesse permission to use her money. They said Lynn was lonely and liked having Jesse around, and that she didn't mind sharing her money.
So they were basically saying Jesse was a good caretaker who was just doing what Lynn wanted. Did that work?
Nope, not at all. It actually made things worse for Jesse. Remember, she had said at first that she saw Lynn like a mother figure, someone she really respected. Now, they were saying Lynn was naive and easy to take advantage of, which just seemed fake and kind of mean.
Like they were using those stereotypes about older people being vulnerable.
Exactly. And the jury didn't like it one bit. It made it even harder to believe anything Jesse or her lawyers were saying.
So the prosecution had a really strong case, and the defense's strategy backfired. But this isn't even the end of the story, right? Even after being found guilty, Jessie couldn't help herself. She had to try to manipulate things one last time.
Oh, yeah. Just when you thought it was over, there was one more twist. It really shows how deep she was in this web of lies.
Okay, but I think we're going to save that last bit for another deep dive. This case is just too wild to cram into one episode. But before we go, I want to thank you for joining us today and for listening to this crazy story.
Yeah, this was a tough one, but it's important to talk about these things, to learn about financial abuse and how to protect ourselves and our loved ones.
Exactly. So until next time, be careful out there and don't forget to check in on your elderly neighbors. You never know who might need a helping hand.